Um, so if you guys remember last summer, I gave a sermon about water. And at the time I said I only know about two things. I know about precious metals and I know about water. So I've done my water speech, and today you're going to hear about precious metals. And when I say precious metals, we're talking silver and gold. So those are going to be the 2 points of discussion for today. Just a little bit about me. My background is engineering, and I currently work for a mining environmental company. And so, for better or worse, today you're going to get an engineer's perspective on some of the different stories from the Bible. So let's start off with a quick prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, we ask you to join us today in our worship as we take time to appreciate another small part of your creation. Please help today's message fill us with wonder, appreciation, and awe at something that you've created and placed here for our benefit. Also help us to better understand you and to remember that you own everything and we're just borrowing it. In the name of your Son, Jesus Christ, we pray. Amen. Okay. So before we get to the silver and gold part of my discussion today, let me begin by getting to the topic in kind of a roundabout way. A few months ago, I took my two older boys on a trip to the country of Egypt, and there we saw pyramids and temples and a Nile River and lots and lots and lots of desert. While we were there, we decided to take a trip to Mount Sinai and climb to the top. Now, I believe at the base of this mountain, there was initially, if you remember, Mount Sinai is the same as Mount Horeb, and there was a meeting, and it was early in the book of Genesis, and there is a fascinating conversation between Moses and God, which transpired through a burning bush. So God catches Moses' attention, tells him to take off his shoes, and then proceeds to tell him that Moses has been carefully groomed to go back to the heart of Egypt and free the Hebrew slaves. Moses, to say the least, is reluctant. He wants evidence, he wants promises, and at one point he even asks to know God's name. He wants to know who is sending him on this mission, and what should he tell the people when they ask who sent him. And so the words go. God replied to Moses, I am who I am. Say to the people of Israel, I am has sent me to you. God also said to Moses, say this to the people of Israel, Yahweh, the God of your ancestors, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, has sent me to you. This is my eternal name, my name to remember for all generations. Okay, let's stop here. You can't really talk about water or silver or gold without a better understanding of God and who God is as our creator. God is stating his name, Lord Yahweh. His name means forever. And that's when he states the words, I am. It's a verb meaning I am present. I am everything. He is stating that he is the eternal one, he has no beginning, and he has no end. His words speak of his omnipotence, which is unlimited power, his omnipresence, meaning he's everywhere or constantly encountered, and his omniscience, that he is all-knowing. He is overseeing but not part of the future, the present, and the past. Each adjective about God is a description of his character and his attributes. And as you try to unravel this, or as I tried to unravel this, it becomes more and more confusing and completely ununderstandable. For the creation, which is us, to understand the creator, God, may be completely ununderstandable, and it might be impossible to some extent to completely grasp exactly who God is. But that's okay, because when God shows up, as he does again and again in the Bible, he should be and he should act godly. There should be a level of ununderstandability about his presence, moments that fill us with wonder and appreciation, confusion, even fear. There's a reason the angels in the Bible say during human divine encounters, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. When we look for him, we may be overcome by his presence, and we need to remember that God doesn't play by our rules. And that's what you're going to hear in my sermon today. There's going to be times that what is said in the Bible doesn't make sense from our perspective. And again, it's because it's a divine encounter. Back to Moses. He goes to Egypt. God unleashes a crazy amount of plagues. Moses parts the sea. Pharaoh's army is destroyed. And the next thing you know, the Hebrew slaves are back at the same mountain with the burning bush. They went back to Mount Sinai. I just learned that during this last trip. The burning bush is believed to be at the base of Mount Sinai. And it is here that Moses proceeds to receive the 10 Commandments and lots of other directions. So like any good parent who is trying to give freedom and direction at the same time, here comes the rules. Do this, don't do that. eat this, don't eat that. And during this time, God spends a great deal of time talking about our topic today, silver and gold. He describes its place in ceremonies and how to build lampstands and ornaments and how to use them and how they play into some kind of worship ceremony. It's obvious that silver and gold were meant as a blessing, and they're valued by God as part of the creation. And they're both special materials to God. He created them. And in the New Testament, we know that silver and gold are also topics that Jesus covers again and again when he's here on earth. So we know that God is our creator. We know that silver and gold were created by God. And because I want to bring an engineering spin into today's message, we know that silver and gold are elements, and they're found in the periodic table of elements. And I know what you're thinking. You're like, really? Again, the periodic table of elements? Yes, the periodic table of elements. And as I've said before, this table is God's handiwork, and it's his building blocks of things that we cannot see with the naked eye that are so perfectly and amazingly balanced. Silver or gold are found in this column. It's known as Group 11. Above them we find copper, and copper, as you know, is an industrial metal. It's used a lot in electricity. And then you have silver, and then below that you have gold. Now I'm going to pass out some samples of silver and gold that I brought today. So you'll know the difference. Gold, and then silver here. So the gold, take it, feel it, the weight of it. These are in troy ounces. So troy ounces are different than the imperial ounces. There's 16 imperial ounces per pound. We all know that. What you didn't realize is that silver and gold precious metals are weighed in troy ounces, and there's 14.6 troy ounces per pound. It's slightly heavier than an imperial ounce. The reason they do that is because that way you can trace back that same exact weight pretty far back, like 1,000 years, right? So roughly we can get a gauge for the value of something by looking at the precious metals. So when you hold on to that piece of gold or you hold on to that piece of silver, it's 1 ounce of gold, and today's spot price of gold is about $2,000. It's exactly $19.50. So $2,000 is that little chunk of gold. And I want you to think about that as we get to some of these other stories in the Bible. Then the other chunk, the silver, that's 5 troy ounces. And so that's worth around $25 an ounce. The exact spot price is about $23.50. But so that's 5 troy ounces in the other sample. And we're going to be using those numbers, the $25 for silver, $2,000 for the gold in today's message. Okay, so let's step back for a little bit and let's just talk about gold itself. What makes gold so special? It's highly durable to the point of virtually indestructible. It's highly malleable, meaning you can pound it into shapes very easily. It's typically found in nature in a relatively pure form. You find veins of gold and there's not a lot to it. It's just gold. It's difficult to find in large quantities, which makes it valuable. That's why it's a precious metal. It doesn't rust. It doesn't tarnish. It doesn't break down over time. It's surprisingly heavy. A gallon of water, we all know, is roughly 8 pounds, 8.34 pounds. If you had a gallon of gold, it would weigh 161 pounds. It is crazy heavy stuff. And most importantly, it's shiny and it's beautiful. Because of these properties, gold is perceived as a symbol of wealth and of power. We see it in jewelry, we see it as a form of currency and a demonstration of prestige. As I mentioned before, when we toured Egypt, you can't tour that country without going to the Museum of Egyptian Antiquity. And it is there that in Egypt, under countless pharaohs, they used gold as a demonstration of power and wealth. The most famous piece that you see at the museum is this, which is the King Tut death mask. It weighs 22.5 pounds, and it's priceless because of its history and detail. And it's mostly made from gold. At the museum, you only have about 30 seconds to look at this piece before the person behind you pushes you out of the way, or the guard yells at you because you're holding everything up. Trust me, you got yelled at a bunch of times because you just want to see the detail of this. It's absolutely, it's incredible. It's a spectacular demonstration of today's topic. And God put silver and gold on this earth. It's a currency and a demonstration of power and wealth, like we talked about. But I think it's important to note that in the Bible, God also makes a blanket statement about silver and gold. And again, when I say silver and gold, we're also talking about money to a certain extent. And I found an interesting statement in a little-known book of the Bible called Haggai. So Haggai 2, 6 through 8. It says, "This is what the Lord Almighty says." They're talking about bringing in the first temple. "In a little while, I will once more shake the heavens and the earth, the sea and the dry ground. I will shake all nations and the desires of all nations to come, and I will fill this house with glory, says the Lord. And then he throws in this interesting statement. It says, the silver is mine, and the gold is mine, declares the Lord Almighty. It's an interesting verse. As I dug into this verse and read the text in several other translations, I began to see this not as a limited statement about the time and specific place of this prophet, but what I think God is saying is he's trying to say that silver and the gold are his, worldwide. It's a strong declarative statement at the end of several moments describing God's character. And it's pretty clear that it's a blanket statement. It's almost similar to Psalms 50. There's a famous verse in Psalms 50 where God says, the cattle on 1,000 hills are mine. So it's that godly moment where when you look at that, that's God basically declaring his dominion over the world. And as I read this, and I'm hearing the craziness, in our house we have 5 kids. My wife and I have 5 kids. It was her idea. And so as I'm trying to prepare for this sermon, there's the craziness going on outside the house, and there's the usual fighting and everything. And as I'm preparing my sermon, I decided to use some of that in today's message. The kids are fighting about balls or toys or where to sit in the vehicle as we go on road trips, or they're fighting about who's sleeping in what bed or blankets or any number of things. It's just a constant, let's fight about stuff. And so what I typically do is I'll set them all down on the couch, and I'll say, okay, guys, just so you know, that food that you eat, that's mine. The toys you're fighting about, those are my toys. The vehicle you ride in, my vehicle, okay? The house you live in is mine. It's all mine. Everything that you touch, everything you breathe, everything you do is mine. What are you guys fighting about? And it's at that point I get 5 blank stares because they don't know what I'm talking about. And that's okay. And I'm going back to the verses of God, and so maybe God makes verses of, I own all the cattle, I own the silver, I own the gold, to, again, it's a godly moment of his declaring his dominance over this world. Okay, now for the fun part. What did Jesus say about gold? We're going to go through 4 stories that Christ talks about where he brings gold into his discussions. Okay, we're going to start slow, and then we're going to start small, and we're going to build to big numbers. In the Sermon on the Mount, in Matthew 6:21, it says, for where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Great statement. No one can serve 2 masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money, or God and gold. So it's a very strong warning from Christ when he was on earth that gold plays a role in our lives, but it's not to be dominant. We're not to worship it. And by money here, you can also substitute the word gold. And to my knowledge, nowhere else in the Bible does God warn us so strongly not to worship anything on par with him like he does when he warns us about our relationship with money and gold. He knows we're going to be drawn in. And we have our tendencies, our potentials for distraction into power and wealth. It's actually encouraging in a way. We can take a tendency that God pointed out in the Bible, and we can take that issue to him. And we can say, hey, God, I'm struggling with this. You knew I was going to struggle with this, right? And as I prepare for the sermon, I'm talking about myself here. I struggle with this. It's baked into my DNA to be pretty impressed by a medal. So, again, but it's not a surprise to him. No different than I'm surprised when my kids are fighting about any number of things my kids fight about. It's just kind of how they are. It's what sin does to us. It makes us act in a way apart from God's desire and what his need was when he created us. And so what I'm trying to get my kids to do is see beyond their squabbling and to have a relationship with me and a relationship with each other. Just like God is trying to get us to see beyond precious metals and say, look, I want you in this relationship because that's a distraction to a big extent. Next story. Luke 21, 1 through 4. As Jesus looked up, he saw the rich putting their gifts into the temple treasury, and he also saw a poor woman put in 2 very small copper coins. Truly I say to you, this widow has put in more than all the others. All these people gave gifts out of their wealth, but she, out of her poverty, put in all that she could, or all that she had to live on. And the reason I want to start with this story is I want to go to the, like I said, extreme on the small side. Here it mentions 2 very small copper coins. The King James Bible actually mentions mites. And as I dug into some research and said, what's a mite worth? Because we're trying to understand from an engineering perspective, what's the dollar amount? So we can get our heads around the dollar amount. It says a mite is worth 1/8 of a penny. So she put in 1/4 of a penny, right? Obviously, this woman was very poor, but the beautiful part of the story is that the creator of the universe noticed her generosity, and her generosity was celebrated. My takeaway here is that nothing is too small to escape the notice of Christ. He wants us to re-examine our hearts and the strings attached and think about just this story as far as her generosity on a percentage basis. Okay, so then let's go to the next part. Next story. All right, before we get into this next one, and you guys are all familiar with the story from Matthew 25, 1 through 4, there is something called a talent. Everyone's probably read those verses before, and it says talent. Does anyone know what a talent is? I happen to have a talent not of gold, but of nickel. And I had this in my garage for some strange reason. It's a long story. So before we get into this story, I'd like to do a quick demonstration. Sophie, can you come up here real quick? I'm going to ask Sophie to lift up a talent of nickel. She's been working out lately. Let's see if she can lift up a talent. A talent is very, very heavy. Okay, you're good. Let's say that you didn't lift that up. Okay. All right, so to lift up a talent of nickel, I'm going to need a little bit more muscle. We're going to get Rodrigo up here. He's been training for several years for this moment. One-handed. Okay. We're going to lift up a talent of nickel. Yeah, just pick it up. This might take a while. There you go. So Rodrigo can struggle and lift up a talent of nickel. Okay, now, just hold it. Just hold it. So my point in having him hold it is it's a lot. It's a lot of weight. So remember, in this story, this guy is handing out talents of gold. So let's read the story very quickly. Okay, for the kingdom of heaven is like a man traveling to a far country who calls in his servants and delivers goods to them. They're going to remember the story more if you struggle. And to the one, he gave 5 talents of gold. Rodrigo can't pick up 5 talents. He can barely pick up 1, right? To another, 2 talents of gold, and to one talent of gold. Rodrigo got 1 talent of nickel. He did even worse than these guys. And immediately he went on a journey. Then he who had received the 5 talents went and traded them and made another 5 talents. This guy now has 10 talents of gold. And likewise, he who had received 2 got 2 more. I'm reading quickly. And he who had received 1 went and dug a hole in the ground and hid the Lord's money. He hid it. And after a long time, the Lord of the servants came and settled accounts with him. Okay, we're good. Thank you. Okay. And the reason I want to throw this out there is I want to clarify something. From now on, anytime you read talent in the Bible, think about that. It's a lot of weight. How much is a single talent of gold? The Bible actually says that a talent of gold is worth 20 years of wages. Sometimes you'll read translations that'll say bag of gold. And that's where the 75 pounds comes in. And the cool thing about precious metals is that the value translates over time. The value of the troy ounce in today's value was worth the value of roughly what it was, again, 1,000 years ago. One example of this that I found in my research is in the early 1800s, it said that a man can buy a really nice suit for a talent of gold. And that's true. Today I could walk into Nordstrom's and I could hand them a talent of gold, if they'd take gold, and I could buy a nice suit. So again, about $2,000 for a suit. It's transferable. The value remains. So when you read the Bible and it talks about a talent of gold or a troy, sorry, did I say talent? A troy ounce of gold. That'd be a really nice suit for a talent of gold. A troy ounce of gold, again, it'd be $2,000. So at Nordstrom's, I can get a suit for about $2,000. A talent of gold, obviously, is much bigger than that little talent of gold you get a hold today, the little troy ounce of gold you get a hold today. So if we do the math, again, we know that 1 talent of gold times 75 pounds times 14.6 troy ounces times $2,000 per troy ounce, each talent of gold is worth $2,190,000. Exactly. When I first did the math, I didn't know what to expect. That's a lot of money, right? So this puts the story in a completely different light for me. The man in the parable doesn't call over his servants and hand them something of little value. He doesn't give each guy $20 and say, go do something with them. He gives them great wealth and asks them to do something with it. If I entrusted someone with $2 million, I'd expect a return after a long time, which is what was stated in the parable. That was my first reaction. If I was the guy handing out money, I would expect a return. My second reaction to this story is God expects a return on his money that he's entrusted to me. And that's a much harder lesson, and I'm still processing that part of the parable. This parable shows a deep generosity from the main character of the story when he hands out blessings. Even 1 talent of gold is a big blessing. And to receive $2 million is going to come with expectations. Okay, so here's my last story. Then Peter came to him, Jesus, and said, Lord, how often shall my brother sin against me and I forgive him? Up to 7 times? And we know that Peter was being generous when he threw out the number 7. Jesus said to him, I do not say unto you up to 7 times, but up to 70 times 7. Therefore the kingdom of heaven is like a certain king who wanted to settle accounts with his servants. And when he had begun to settle accounts, one was brought to him who owed him 10,000 talents. But as he was not able to pay, the master commanded that he be sold and his wife and children and all that they had, and the payments be made. The servant therefore fell down before him, saying, Master, have patience on me, and I will pay you all. Then the master of that servant was moved with compassion, released him, and forgave him the debt. So again, the units should be a little striking when you go from 1 talent to 10,000 in the story. And it's generated from Peter saying, how many times should I forgive this guy? 7? No. Christ comes in and takes the godly approach. So let's do a little math. 10,000 talents of gold times 75 pounds times 14.6 troy ounces times $2,000 per troy ounce. The forgiven debt, $21.9 billion. Okay? Suddenly that parable is a little bit different than if you don't know the units of what a talent is worth. And remember earlier that we also said that a talent is 20 years of wages. So basically this guy had a debt of 200,000 years of debt. What was funny to me is as I was researching this sermon, the New Living Translation, which I typically like, said that the man owed the king millions of dollars. Whoever translated that was not an engineer, okay? I was like, this is not true. If I won the lottery and the lottery said, hey, you just won millions, or I really won $21.9 billion, that's a big difference. Right? It's a lot of zeros that they missed. But again, that's not the point. The point is that the king forgave an incredible, an unthinkable amount of debt. It's hard to fathom the depth of generosity of the king in this story. The man could never, ever pay this off. In the story, it's obvious that the king is God, and we are the man in the story. And we're not really talking about gold here. This story was told by Peter asking about forgiveness. Jesus is setting the mood here to show that the man in the story has run up an incredible amount of debt. Peter thought he was being generous, and he said 7. And when Jesus said 70 times 7, I know as the engineer in the room, I'd quickly do the math and be like, all right, I got to forgive somebody 490 times, and if that 491, they're out, except for the story on the back end, which shows me I can't really count the 490. It doesn't work that way. And then I come back to the silver is mine, and the gold is mine. Only God himself knows what it really means to forgive $21.9 billion in debt. Now, it would be nice if the story stopped here, but unfortunately, it doesn't. There's the next part, and it goes on. But that servant went out and found one of his fellow servants who owed him 100 denarii. And he laid his hands on him and took him by the throat, and he said, pay me what you owe. So his fellow servant fell down at his feet and begged him, saying, have patience with me, and I will pay you all. And he would not. And he went and threw him into prison until he should pay that debt. Now again, we know that 600 denarii, or 6,000 denarii, is 1 talent of gold. So let's do the math. How much did this guy owe his fellow servant? Okay, so 1 talent times 75 pounds times 14.6 troy ounces times $2,000 per troy ounce times 6,000, or divided by 6,000 denarii, we get a total of $36,500 that he owes. What I like about this story is that's still a lot of money, right? As I start to think about this, it's a very practical amount of money that you would be passionate and frustrated if you lose. So if you loan that to someone and they didn't pay you back, would I be mad? Yes. Would I choke someone for that amount of money? Absolutely, I would choke someone for that amount of money. Right? It's a realistic amount of money to lose. It's not $20. But the first part of this story, that's what makes the whole bigger picture really pathetic. is that this is only 0.00016% of the man that he himself was forgiven potentially earlier that day. And that's the painful part of what we're reading here. And it's a very stern warning about forgiveness. And it's a, you are forgiven, now go forgive message. And it's very overwhelming in comparison. And the story continues. So when his fellow servants saw what had done, they were very grieved, and they came and told their master all that had been done. And then the master, after that, he called him, and he said to him, "You wicked servant, I forgave you all that debt because you begged me. Should you not also have compassion on your fellow servant, just as I had pity on you?" And his master was angry and delivered him to the torturers until he should pay all that was due him. So my heavenly Father will also do to each of you from his heart does not forgive his brother his trespasses. This story puts a very interesting spin on forgiveness and the debt that I now need to have forgiven and the debt that I need to forgive others. It's the numbers, when you run the numbers on the precious metals, it's even more shocking than probably what we originally thought as we read it without really knowing the value of gold. So, to wrap this up, when God thunders from on high and says, "The silver is mine and the gold is mine," what should be my response to those statements? I found the answer in a beautiful prayer presented by King David near the end of his life in 1 Chronicles chapter 29. At this point in the story, King David's star is setting, and he is getting older in his years. He's passing along the torch to his son Solomon, who's now going to be the king, over the kingdom of Israel and build the temple for the Lord. If you remember, David wanted to build the temple, but God said, "I don't want you to build the temple. I want you to help prepare for the temple," and Solomon himself is going to build the temple. And so David, you can only imagine, is probably in his 70s, 80s. He's getting older, and he's still excited. He's still remembering that he has served his life worshiping God and doing some things right and some things wrong, right? But then as we go to 1 Chronicles chapter 29, it talks about how David is going to help with the dedication of the temple, the materials to build the temple itself. And it says, "Besides in my devotion to the temple of my God, I now give my personal treasures of gold and silver to the temple of my God, over and above everything I provided for the holy temple, 3,000 talents of gold and 7,000 talents of refined silver to the overall walls of the building." So here's a man who's at the end of his life, and he's saying, out of my personal treasury, here's my donation to build God's temple. So we know that's a lot of metal, that's a lot of precious metals, so I can't help myself. I need to do the math. What are we looking at here, right? How much is King David dedicating from his personal wealth? What does his donation look like? So if we run the math, right, on 3,000 talents of gold, 7,000 talents of silver, we get to a total of $6.8 billion. That is quite a donation. And remember, this is from a boy that started out as a shepherd boy, right? And he was from very humble beginnings. It's also someone who knows a lot about asking for and experiencing forgiveness. And I think that's the interesting parallel here is David, in his level of receiving forgiveness, has now said, "I'm giving back what he knows it to be God's." He's basically handing it back and saying, "I don't want this. I want to give it back to you as a dedication for a temple that's going to mean a lot to you." 6.8 billion. Where is David's heart? I'm going to ask the band to come back up on stage for this last part. As we think about this part and David's donations, we ask, where's David's heart? Have you ever thought of King David as a multi-billionaire? I'd like to close this sermon with a prayer from King David that he gives in 1 Chronicles 29, immediately after presenting this offering to God in front of the Hebrew people. Would you guys please pray with me as we walk through these verses in 1 Chronicles 29? And as I talk through it, think about his heart and his example of how we should think about the silver and the gold that God has entrusted us with. Think about the proper perspective of how to use God's wealth that he has blessed us with. All right, I'm going to put it up on the screen, and this will be our closing prayer. Praise be to you, Lord, and the God of our Father of Israel, from everlasting to everlasting. Yours, Lord, is the greatness and the power and the glory and the majesty and the splendor. For everything in heaven and earth is yours. Yours, Lord, is the kingdom. You are exalted as head over all. Wealth and honor come from you. You are the ruler of all things. Your hands are strength and power to exalt and give strength to all. Now, our God, we give you thanks and praise your glorious name. Amen. So this prayer is a celebration of God's bigness. It's a reminder that it all comes from him, and a thanksgiving and a praise of the temporary gifts that we've been given. So Newday, I ask that as you enjoy the remainder of your Sabbath, think about the silver and the gold in your life. Think about the smallness of copper coins and how Christ noticed the tiniest details. Think about the richness of God's forgiving mercy. And please take a moment to praise our incredible Creator. Thank you.